Okay, we will get out of the way and turn things over to our highly esteemed panel here. And obviously, it's been a pleasure to have Bruce with us for the 2 days. We've had both Commissioner Salmón and Terry Fulp with us as well, and we are now joined by Governor Lewis. And we are truly honored to have all three of them here to share U.S. and Mexico federal perspectives and the perspectives of one of the key tribes and some of the conversations we have been talking about. Gentlemen, thank you, and Bruce.
Okay, Jim, after your brief, extended remarks, I am now looking at the clock, and your agenda says we have 25 minutes to divide up among three of the most accomplished and interesting speakers possible. So I am going to take the chair's prerogative and say, I'm going to give each one of you 10 minutes, and that'll run us past, but we've got to hear from these folks. And the next thing I'm going to do is dispense with about 90% of the introductory remarks. These folks have been introduced and reintroduced, and if you haven't figured out who they are by now, you don't belong in this conference. Now, our first speaker, I would only say, brings to recollection a picture that was taken nearly 20 years ago, somewhere on the lower Colorado, at a signing ceremony behind a giant banner which said, "Peace has come to the Colorado River." Now, talk about a misrepresentation. The one guy in that little group of a dozen people who is still with the project is a much younger Terry Fulp, who even then was at the center of bringing us together on this concept of, hey, we got to do some mathematics on this river. We got to learn how to say structural deficit. We got to learn how to say water balance. And he's been with us ever since. And he is now, of course, really running the show as the de facto water master of the lower Colorado River. Terry, have at it.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Well, what a pleasure and what a great introduction, Secretary Babbitt. It's just so great to see you. Before I say anything of any maybe depth, I want to just echo what Jim just said. You all at this institute and the center do a great job. This has been a wonderful time. It's fun. There's real conversation going on, and I just want to say thank you all. I want to also thank the sponsors, and I'll look for my check later. So all of you know that as a Fed, we don't get anything, but and we don't mind. That's fine. That's our jobs. It's all about public service for us. And I also want to say to all the other speakers, very well done, and appreciate your real heartfelt comments. And then finally to the journalists there, let me ask you, if you ever need something and you don't understand something, call us. Really, I mean that. It's what we do, and we might have to say off the record, I know these aren't right now, but as long as we can have that conversation, we'd love to talk to you. What you all do for us on this river system is invaluable, and that is get the word out. Get the communication and keep the communication going, and we really appreciate that. So Commissioner Berman couldn't be here today. She sends her regards. She also, and Commissioner Salmón and I are all flying to Mexico City tomorrow because we're having meetings there to talk about our implementation of Minute 323. So I thought about, well, this whole idea, and I love the way you structured this. This is all about DCP and beyond. And if I could do a Buzz Lightyear imitation, I think that's what we ought to be saying all the time, right? So what about DCP? You've already heard about it. I just wanted to share maybe one thing about it. It began June 28th, 2013, with then Secretary Jewell. Ann Castle was at that meeting. It was a small meeting between the federal government and the 7 basin states governors' representatives. On March 19th, 2019, those 7 states' representatives signed a letter to Congress transmitting the DCP. So you don't have to go home and calculate it. That was 2,090 days. These things are really hard. That's going to be the theme you're going to continue to hear. And many of you know an attorney of ours, Bob Snow. He's probably the most unsung hero on the river. But we were sitting around with the commissioner prior to the signing, and I just threw out this factoid. Hey, did you realize it'd been 2,090 days? And Bob Snow looked up and he said, didn't feel like a day over 2,000. So that's who he is in the absolute most hardest, most difficult times. He can maintain his cool and keep his sense of humor, and we love him. So all of these big river initiatives, I'll call them, I've had about a half a dozen that I've had the privilege really to be involved in. And you've heard the names of all of them now. There's only one that we haven't mentioned. That's the Multi-Species Conservation Program, a 50-50 cost share between us and our water and power users. It's the most innovative way to have ESA compliance, I believe, that has ever been. And so I won't bore you with it, but I just would throw that one out. It's one of the big ones. So what's it take to get these things done? I was really thinking about that, and I think there's really at least 3 things. And there's many more, but I boil it down to 3. First of all, you need sound, trusted, technical information. Without it, you can't move forward, in my opinion. Now, I've also come from a technical background, so I have maybe a bit of a bias about that, but I think it's really absolutely critical. You have to have a collaborative spirit. These get solved only through that. Of course, you start with communication, but it's really about collaboration. We heard it a little bit before. Everybody, it's a give and take. That's what these are. And if you can't collaborate, it won't work. And all of that comes from strong relationships. So convenings like this help build relationships. I've met new people here, but I've also seen many other people that you have conversations with me, and we have all had conversations that help strengthen our relationships. We can't do this without strong relationships throughout the basin. It's just impossible. So I think that's how we get it done. I think we're also fortunate in another area on the Colorado River, and that is it's essentially apolitical. And it has shown me in my 30-year career that it's apolitical. I've gone through 4 transitions in this period of time, starting with Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. And I can assure you through all of those, there were initiatives we were in the middle of. And when the new folks showed up, we just kept going. And it's extremely important that we keep it that way because it will be very, very difficult to get through these things if we don't. So now what are we going to do going forward? We're going to have a session on it in just a minute. And Sandy, I think in one of the sessions earlier said, hey, they're difficult. They are. These are the most difficult things in the world. But we have to keep moving and we have to keep working on them. So one of the first things we're going to have to do is figure out what's on the table and what's not on the table. This will be one of the most difficult things of the whole process. We've heard a lot about it. Structural deficit, compact delivery or depletion, non-depletion requirement. Water rights was even mentioned. Law of the river was mentioned. I mean, these are really hard things. And what we've learned over the river, I think in these years of really strong collaboration, is you can only take steps so big. I think we all believe we need a sustainability plan, right? We do. Will we get to it this next time? I can't say yes. I don't know if we will or won't. But what we have to do is make sure that we move a step forward in the right direction, the positive direction. Even if it's not as big a step as we'd all like to see, we have to keep moving forward. And we will get there. So we'll have to see that. That's the first thing that's going to be tough. I think the other thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out if non-stationarity is the new norm. Can I say that? I mean, that's okay, isn't it? What are we going to do about projections, the future? It's all about risk. We have to do risk analysis. And even though we've done a lot of work for these last 20 years in science and our modeling and all this other stuff, this is going to be a tough deal. It is to figure out how to really assess risks as we look at different scenarios and alternatives. But here's what I'd like to leave you with. We know how to do this. Anyone doubt that we don't know how to do it? We've got a track record of it, 6 at least, and we can do another one. But what it takes is all the things I just said and one other key piece. 30 years of my career on this river has gone like that. Probably Secretary would say the same thing. Your 8 went by fast. I mean, it's fast. And what we have to do is make sure we're bringing up the people behind us. I often say, leave a legacy. So the legacy could be what you got done, but the real legacy is who you left. Because if we don't have that same momentum from the heart, and I mean from the heart, passion for this river, we won't get there. And to me, that's the most important thing each of us can do, and we need to continue to work on it. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Terry. Our next speaker is the Mexican Commissioner to the Mexico-United States International Boundary and Water Commission. Now, Roberto, I want to just say to this group 2 things that I especially like and admire about you. The first is you're not a lawyer. And the second, relating to it, is you are a multiple degree holder from the University of Arizona.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is reflective of an extraordinary background in agricultural science and economics. As a holder of 2 degrees, who is, I am told, now working on a PhD.
Right.
So that is an extraordinary package, and it's been reflected in the collaborative work that has progressed so incredibly well against such an improbable national background in river issues across that boundary. And I'm sure that's what he's going to talk to us about today. So, Roberto, it's all yours.
Thank you. Hello again. Thank you, Secretary Babbitt. I could not have hoped for a better introduction. Thank you very much. There are 2 things that I picked up yesterday. The first one is I picked it up from a lady that was in the first panel here, Sarah Porterfield. And when she said that she was going to tell the story, I like that. So I changed everything that I was going to say here to tell the story. Okay. And the second, it was a comment from Secretary Babbitt that caught my attention. He mentioned that there was a time where Arizona couldn't talk to California or Colorado, I think she said. And that caught my attention and struck me, and I said, how? I mean, why? Why these things happen? So then I'm going to relate these 2 things what I'm going to tell you about. In 2007, both governments, Mexico and the U.S., decided to get together and establish a dialogue between the two countries. And the purpose of this dialogue was to come up with different actions that could benefit both countries in the Colorado River. It was the 8th year of this declining levels of Lake Mead. And the next year, this process was handled to the International Boundary and Water Commission. They should come up with the methodology to bring the two countries together and discuss these issues. In 2008, some of you may remember there was a tragic accident, and the Mexican commissioner and the U.S. commissioner of the IBWC, they perished in an airplane while they were flying from El Paso to Presidio, Texas, to attend flooding from the Rio Conchos in that part of the Rio Grande. So they crashed, and I was at that time, as I mentioned before, the regional water manager for National Water Commission in Mexico in the Northwest region. I had two big major hurricanes in the same month, so I was myself attending a flooding in South Sonora. Next year, in April, I was named the commissioner, Mexican commissioner of the IBWC, and in June, we were in San Diego having my first meeting of this binational cooperation, Colorado River cooperation process. And my first reaction in that big table with a lot of people from all the states in the basin, NGOs and things like that, and said, what are we doing here? There's a treaty. I just need to get my water, and I don't have to sit down and discuss anything. And I saw the same attitude from my American counterparts. We just sitting there, and nothing was happening. With time, we will see members of the U.S. delegation probably having lunch, because we stayed in the same hotels always. And they will say, hey, come on, do you want to have lunch together? I will say, sure, yeah. So we'll sit down, have a beer, or a couple of beers, or a Coke, or whatever. And then ideas started to come to the table. So when you build this sort of friendship first, then trust follows that path. And then when there is trust, then you start getting ideas, and ideas will at the end become minutes of the IBWC, which are all these ideas that were developed by these people having trust in each other and putting those ideas, those actions into minutes. And this process came up in a period of 10 years with 5 minutes, which is a big accomplishment. So we went from minute 316, that's related to the operation of the Yuma desalting plant, that we, both countries, for the first time ever, and a coalition of NGOs, environmental NGOs, put water into the Ciénaga de Santa Clara while the plant was being, the test run in the desalination plant of Yuma was being done. So that was the first minute that was produced by this process. The second was minute 317. This minute is the one that sets all the stage for what it was coming in the future. Then minute 318. Minute 318 came before the earthquake in Mexicali, which destroyed a great part of the irrigation conveyance system, and Mexico was not going to be able to use that water for irrigation. So we negotiated with the United States that water could be stored in Lake Mead while Mexico repaired the infrastructure that was damaged by the earthquake. Okay, part of that water is still in Lake Mead. Okay. And then we had minute 319, which was a more comprehensive minute. It has a lot of things that we negotiated. It's a huge package. And then minute 323, which was signed in September of 2017. So this whole process came by sitting together in the same table and talking to each other. Okay? And then, as 2 years ago, Commissioner Drusina, which was my counterpart until a few months ago, we went to Jordan, and there was a meeting of the Palestinians, Jordanians, and Israelis, and we were there to talk to them and see how we do things here between Mexico and the U.S. regarding to water. And they say, how do you do to sit down and talk? I said, well, we just do it. I mean, just sit down and talk. And I said, how long, what's the period between your meetings? I said, well, I text Commissioner Drusina almost every day. We meet every week. Our people meet on a daily basis. So we get pretty much communicated. So how long do you meet? I said, about every 5 years. I said, well, no, you're not going to accomplish anything meeting every 5 years. You need to sit down. You have to know the name of his wife, how many children he has, okay, how many grandchildren, their names, etc. So you need to build this relationship. So I was struck when Secretary Babbitt said that you wouldn't talk to California or Colorado. So I think that the first thing that we do is build this communication and then build trust. I am really honored to have worked for the last 10 years with such fine people as Terry Fulp, Bob Snow, Ann Castle, Mike Connor, Esteban Lopez, and all those people. I mean, really great bunch of people, very professional and very dedicated to the Colorado River. And I think I just leave it here. And I thank you very much for your patience.
Roberto, thank you. This is really an extraordinary contrast to events at the national level in this country. To think that in the midst of so much deliberately engendered conflict, that we, in this basin, are still talking and working. And it's really an example of the kind of thing that Terry is talking about. We're here, and if we communicate and relate, we can make it happen. Now, by way of introducing our next speaker, I just want to add an intensely personal note. because the Gila River Indian community now stands, I think, as the single most impressive example of what we've kind of been circling around for the last few days, is how do we transfer divvying up the water into actual water policy on the land and management and relationships to all of the other issues that we've kind of been touching upon. I would submit to you, Governor Lewis, that what's known as the 2004 Arizona Water Settlement Act is the most progressive document that has yet been designed to put together all of these issues, which you can now see actually playing out on the land across the Gila River community. And it's quite remarkable that initiated by Governor Rod Lewis, whose wife and Governor Lewis's mother is here with us today, this progression has taken place in which the next Governor Lewis has now emerged to carry out all of this extraordinary effort, and in the process, most remarkably, emerged as the most clear-headed, thoughtful leader in the entire Arizona DCP process. And it's just extraordinary to think the distance that has come across these two generations in which I am and many others are looking to the governor of the Gila River Indian community to save Arizona from its leadership and get something done. Governor Lewis.
Thank you. Well, it's good, Tosh. Shamay Masma, how is everybody doing today? It's really an honor to be able to speak before you. And thank you so much, Secretary Babbitt, for those kind words. Both my father, the late Rod Lewis, they had a true relationship together based out of respect. My father, although was not the governor, but I think he thought he was at the time. He was one of the first Native American attorneys within Indian country. He was the first one to pass the bar in the state of Arizona and the first one to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court successfully back in the early 80s. And it is about, I'm honored to be a part of this panel because it is about two things. It is about honoring legacies, honoring the past, and it is about those connections. As Indian people, that is who we are. We honor connections. Connections to one another, connections to our natural resources, connections to our environment, to our earth, to our mother. And I think, when, as addressing journalists, and this is off the record, right? Was this? I see, I think Tony got up. Oh, no, Tony's over here. Okay, he's, I know there are some of you journalists who I think when we began this process, at least the community, the process in DCP, I know there were a few of you journalists who I've got to know along the way. And when DCP was first really was being covered in the media, when the community got involved in 2016, we weren't at the table. Tribes were not at the table. And I think that's important when we start talking about these connections, when we start talking about communication. I think that and especially how this is being covered by the media. Tribes have to be at the table, at the policy table. Tribes, and it's great that we have a representative from an international perspective, from the country of Mexico, because as tribes, we consider ourselves nations within a nation, as sovereign nations. And when we talk about water policy, I know initially DCP, that first framework really was unacceptable to the community because we weren't at the table. But we knew, and this goes back to us as the Gila River Indian community, as the Okima O'odham Peepash people. This is our land. This is what we call our O'odham Juvut, our land here. This is where we trace our historic tie to the Hoogam civilization. The Hoogam were one of the most remarkable civilizations. You know, when you take into account that the Roman Empire lasted 500 years, this great Hoogam civilization lasted over 1,000 years. And in fact, that spirit is still alive to this day. In all of the O'odham, the Thana O'odham nation down, our sister tribe down by the border of Mexico, the Akchin Indian community, the Gila River Indian community, and the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community as well. You know, the Hoogam, some of these canal systems have been dated over 1,000 years old. And it's that same canal footprint that is being built on by what we call the current Phoenix modern day metropolitan, this city here. And the Hoogam, they knew that you had to be in balance with your surrounding environment, that living in this beautiful Juvut, this beautiful Sonoran desert, there's a delicacy to it. There's a delicate balance to this. And this is something, and this is you know, the Hoogam had built canal systems and had done such engineering marvels that rivaled those in the Nile Valley in Egypt. And so that's who we proudly honor those connections and honor that legacy. And that's when I tell our young children, I said, you know, engineering, being a water protector, being of the water, of our O'odham Shudug, that's in your DNA, and never betray that. And so when we talk about our connection to the water, our historic connection to the water, you know, this is something that as the governor now, I am honoring those connections to my relatives, to those that have gone on to our Creator. My father as well, who had devoted his whole legal career to fighting for our water settlement, of course, which culminated in the Arizona Water Settlement Act of 2004. And I think that was one of the things my father said. He was always to the point. When I became governor, he said, son, don't mess this up. Among other things. And I said, I understand, Dad. And so, he loomed large, and he still looms large. I know that he's here watching over us. He's here present today. But when journalists, and getting back to, I think you have such an important role, even now today, in the political environment that we are in, you have such a critical role. Issues such as water, such as those type of natural resources, that there are scarce, and they're going to continue to be scarce. You have a sacred right to communicate this out to our citizens. The whole aspect of keeping our democracy safe and well is lying to you, even more so today. For the community, we had our water taken away from us. Literally, we were driven to the point of almost extinction over 160 years ago. We had farmed, and we had our principal source was the Gila River. And when more settlers came, they had illegally diverted water upstream. Early accounts show that as recently as 1850, we were the breadbasket of the Southwest, if not all of Arizona. And literally, less than 20, 30 years later, our water supply was almost diverted entirely, and thus began our historic fight for our water, to return our water, to fight for our water rights. And so when that was finally restored to a point in 2004 with the water settlement, that was, I think, an important chapter. But how we see this, and it's about telling a story as well. DCP, the Drought Contingency Plan, that was the beginning chapter of defending our water settlement. I think the tribes that are here, I think it is one historic, I think, point to regain your water rights, but it is a whole other discussion and struggle to actually get those water rights, get those into play, to implement your water settlement. And we're seeing this today. So I see my role and my leadership as actually protecting the sanctity of our water settlement moving forward. Because we're going to be doing this again in 2026, aren't we? And tribes need to be at the table when we're discussing this. I know that you've had a full days of meeting yesterday. I saw some great panels, and then this was also part of the 10X as well all this week. You know what? We were in D.C. Attending both the Senate and the House meetings in regards to finally getting, with those 7 states, finally getting DCP, getting the final authorizing federal legislation for that. And I apologize for not being there at a panel that was earlier this week. But you know, DCP still hasn't been approved yet. We are still in a gray area. But I think we have, one of the things I saw is our Arizona delegation really came together and supported and saw the importance of tribes being a part of DCP. In Arizona, I have to tell you, you know, because we weren't at the table, that doesn't mean that we didn't have a part to play. In fact, because of our water settlement, we have over 311,000 acres of CAP water in lieu of supply. And it was that amount of water that helped to make DCP a success. DCP could not have been, at least our, within our Arizona DCP authorizing framework, without the support of tribes. And I think that's important for journalists to know, that there is a tribal story. There is a tribal perspective. And that's one of the reasons why I was in D.C. Even when the overall DCP legislation was being discussed, there still wasn't that tribal voice being told in Senate, in the House. And so it was up to me and other tribal leaders such as the Gila River Indian community, trying to tell our story, trying to say, you know, that we, you know, that it was our contributions that are for to keep Lake Mead, 2 principles that we've always operated on. One was that the conservation efforts at Lake Mead to make sure that there are no crashing levels of Lake Mead, and to make sure that, you know, and it's the rule of holes. You know, when you're in a hole, what do? You stop digging, right? You keep water in Lake Mead. That was very important to us. If we were going to put our sacred water up and protect and shore up those levels in Lake Mead, that water was going to be there to protect those levels of Lake Mead. And the other one was to us, which was sacred, is our tribal water settlement. That our water settlement would not be undermined in any way. And and to be truly honest, there were times where potentially our water settlement could have been compromised through the process. And that's where, as tribal leaders, that's where we have to be at the table. That's where I think that's a tremendous backstory for you journalists. We had just another historic moment for our community, was that we opened up an interpretive trail in our community where we have an actual working underground aquifer that we are storing water in. And we're actually bringing back the flow of the river. We're also creating the original wetlands, riparian habitat, all of the indigenous plants, the animals, the flora and the fauna are actually coming back to the Gila River. The land is, for the most part, is healing itself. And so we have an interpretive trail that is, it's twofold. It's a working aquifer, but it actually tells the story of our historic tie to the river. So that is for our youth to learn, to continue to learn about us as river people, our elders who just really, when they see this, and they haven't even seen the flowing river until as long as they were children. This was truly something remarkable. And I remember one of the journalists who wanted to interview me when we dedicated this. Of course, Governor Ducey from Arizona showed up. We had both Congressman Tom O'Halloran, who is our congressman. We had Republicans and Democrats together, so you could see that this was important beyond a partisan take on water, that this was an important to all Arizonans, having to do with the current working with the community's significance on DCP. And one of the journalists said, Governor, this is important, but there's so much here. There's so much history here. And and I want to cover this respectfully. I want to cover this, this truthfully. And there is history here. And I think that's, as I end here, I think that's just such an important role and responsibility and burden that you have as journalists, is to get that history, to make sure that you are informed about the history of tribes, especially in the Southwest, especially having to do with water. I mean, this water is a touchstone, but there are so many other issues of tribal sovereignty, issues that are affecting tribes. One of the, I think, an important part of Indian law is that tribes are looked at as a miner's canary. Where those ills first, and they hit tribes the hardest, and we're the first ones to get affected by these maladies or by these serious issues in society, and we truly are. And I think, whether it's more initiatives to get more Native American journalists, whether your bureaus hire more Native Americans, or whether there is some opportunity to educate journalists on tribal sovereignty, on issues where the tribal perspective, where you have that as a framework when you're writing these stories, I think it's so important even now. And these issues such as water, these issues such as the Indian Child Welfare Act, issues such as the violence against women, issues such as the murdered and missing women, that's epidemic. Whether in Canada, whether in the northern border, whether down in the Southwest, there are important issues that are happening to Indigenous people that need to be covered appropriately, respectfully, and factually. And that's up to you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Really.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.